Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Presidency of George W. Bush by Robert Greene. Narrated by Christopher Grove. Foreword. The aim of the American Presidency series is to present historians and the general reading public with interesting scholarly assessments of the various presidential administrations. These interpretive surveys are intended to cover the broad ground between biographies, specialized monographs, and journalistic accounts. As such, each will be a comprehensive work which will draw upon original sources and pertinent secondary literature, yet leave room for the author's own analysis and interpretation. Volumes in the series will present the data essential to understanding the administration under consideration. Particularly, each book will treat the then-current problems facing the United States and its people, and how the President and his associates felt about, thought about, and worked to cope with these problems. Attention will be given to how the office developed and operated during the President's tenure. Equally important will be consideration of the vital relationships between the President, his staff, the executive officers, Congress, foreign representatives, the judiciary, state officials, the public, political parties, the press, and influential private citizens. The series will also be concerned with how this unique American institution, the presidency, was viewed by the presidents and with what results. All this will be set, insofar as possible, in the context not only of contemporary politics, but also of economics, international relations, law, morals, public administration, religion, and thought. Such a broad approach is necessary to understanding, for a presidential administration is more than the elected and appointed officers composing it, since its work so often reflects the major problems, anxieties, and glories of the nation. In short, the authors in this series will strive to recount and evaluate the record of each administration and to identify its distinctiveness and relationships to the past, its own time, and the future. The General Editors. Preface. Life lessons come at you at the strangest times. One afternoon in early September 1978, I attended my first class as a doctoral candidate. The professor, a well-published gentleman who specialized in early colonial history, sized up the 5 students, each of whom had declared their field of interest in modern American political history. After some opening pleasantries, he looked at us and softly growled, "Nothing that happened after 1776 is history. It's all just current events." Hyperbolic instructional melodrama, to be sure, but there is a grain of truth to the observation. While there has long been a healthy debate over how far removed a professional historian has to be from a person or an event before they can properly draw a judgment, there can be little doubt that works of instant history, like those books, articles, press accounts, and Internet observations written, for example, while a president is in office, do not have the proper distance from their subject to be classified as solid historical analysis. But a decade would seem to offer a reasonable space of time after which preliminary judgments might be more balanced. It has now been 13 years since the end of the presidency of George W. Bush, who served from January 20, 2001 to January 20, 2009. It has also been 8 years since the George W. Bush Presidential Library opened to scholars in 2013. The records of the Bush administration, as well as other archives around the country, are slowly being made available for professional scrutiny. They can now provide a welcomed addition to the preliminary literature on the Bush administration and can only add to our understanding of the most tumultuous presidency of the modern period. When one mentions the name of the 43rd President of the United States, the first thing that comes into most people's minds is a grotesque visual, one that is firmly stamped in the minds of anyone who was of age on September 11, 2001, that of two commercial airliners exploding as they rammed the World Trade Center in New York City. The attacks of 9/11 and the resulting war on terror are, indeed, the defining events of the administration of the second Bush, and this book will utilize newly available documents to explore the results of those events. But unlike much of the earlier literature on the topic, this book will not judge the Bush presidency based solely on its handling of the war on terror. As is the goal of this series, one in which I have been privileged to publish 2 other volumes, the goal of this book is to provide the listener with a detailed overview and an analysis of the whole of the presidency of George W. Bush, along with national security issues, other topics, domestic policies, economic policies, social welfare policies are covered here. My judgments on that presidency have been informed not just by the existing literature, but also by newly available archival material, housed primarily at the Bush Library, but also in several other repositories, the first scholarly work on the second Bush to be so sourced. I hope that in writing this book, I have utilized time and distance to my advantage as a scholar. Having worked on this project for more than 8 years, I have had time not only to collect much new information, but to digest it and process my conclusions. The listener will find that this led to my disagreeing with the hyperbolic conclusions of much of the early literature on the Bush presidency. In addition, I hope that having the luxury of historical distance and a wider array of sources will allow for more measured, balanced, and, one would hope, accurate conclusions, so that the listener might better understand the pivotal importance of this first American presidency of the 21st century. Working toward these goals for the better part of 8 years, one naturally incurs many debts. I must first express my gratitude for the valuable contributions made by the authors and scholars who have already studied the Bush administration. I have offered my analysis of these works in the bibliographical essay. I am also grateful to have had the opportunity to utilize the documents housed at the George W. Bush Presidential Library, many of which are utilized in this volume for the first time. The staff at the Bush Library made the many research trips a pleasure. I thank Library Director Brigadier General Patrick X. Mordente and Alan Almodovar, Virginia Butler, Melissa Culpepper, Rachel Friend, Tally Fugate, Shirley Coling, Elizabeth Lanier, Eric McCrory, Sarah Quick, Paul Santa Cruz, Jill Zawacki, and Brandon Zogg. I also am appreciative of the willingness of many researchers to submit Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) requests for material in the Bush presidential records. Their efforts led to the opening of new material that all scholars, including myself, can utilize. Other archives and archivists were as quick to assist me in this project. Edith A. Sandler at the Library of Congress, University archivist Dan Link, April Armstrong, and Krista Cleaton at the Seeley G. Mudd Manuscripts Library, Princeton University, Mary Finch of the George H. W. Bush Presidential Library, and Tanya J. Wood, Senior Reference Archivist at the Texas State Library and Archives Commission. I cannot thank enough those who agreed to be interviewed for this work. They include Ambassador L. Paul Bremer III, Andrew J. Card, Jr., B. Alexander Sandy Kress, J. Lefkowitz, Vice Admiral John McConnell, John McLaughlin, Terry Nelson, Carl Rove, Francis Townsend, and Tevi Troy. All interviews were recorded. All recordings will be donated to the George W. Bush Presidential Library. 2 programs deserve the thanks of all modern historians. Since 1982, the Hofstra University Cultural Center, in conjunction with the Departments of History and Political Science of that institution, has put on a series of conferences dealing with the modern American presidency. Scholars, administration alumni, and often the president himself get together for a series of valuable discussion sessions. On March 24 to 26, 2015, Hofstra put on a conference dealing with the presidency of George W. Bush. Recordings of selected conference sessions are available at hofstra.edu/culturalcmmunity/GWB/GWB-video.html. The second is the Miller Center at the University of Virginia, which houses one of the nation's premier oral history programs on the American presidency. At the time of this writing, the Miller Center has released 46 of these interviews dealing with the presidency of George W. Bush. They can be found at millercenter.org/the-presidential-oral-histories/George-W-Bush. I have been fortunate, and given the demographics of academia, somewhat unique, to have worked at only one institution for the first 42 years of my career. I have many friends at Cazenovia College, and many of them helped me with this work. I particularly want to thank President Ronald Cheeseborough, Vice President for Academic Affairs Sharon Detmer, Administrative Assistant Rebecca Beckwith, and Division Chair Stuart Wiseman, for their consistent support of this project. Many thanks to the staff at my home library, the Terry Library at Cazenovia College's Witherell Learning Center, Director Heather Whalen Smith, and Judy Azotto, Lauren Michelle, and Sarah O'Neill. My computer only works because of my friends in Information and Computer Technologies, Director David Palmer, and Bryant Beers, Sue Bach, Michael Cameron, Kelly Cresswell, Will Gordon, Dwayne Heichman, Genevieve Phillips, and Lee Titia. Several talented undergraduates also contributed to this work. Robert Foster's research and writing on the election of 2000 were particularly useful, and I thank Kyle Durkee and Abby House for their assistance in transcribing several recorded interviews, as well as Alexandra Mossman for research assistance. This will be my 6th book with the University Press of Kansas. I owe any success I have had as a published author to my good friend, Emeritus Director Fred Woodward, who encouraged this project from its inception in 2015, as he has each of my books with UPK. Upon Fred's retirement, support for my work did not waver. Chuck Myers listened to my concerns with a quiet, sympathetic ear as the book began to evolve. Acquisitions editor David Congdon was equally supportive, and illustrated the maxim of patience being a virtue as my work blew through several deadlines. Susan Eklund again improved my prose with a great copy edit. Kelly Crispin-Jacques again turned my prose into a book. Carl Jansen again designed a wonderful cover, and Mike Kehoe again saw to it that the world knew about this book. Together they create a supportive environment for an author. I am proud to be a UPK author. The Cazenovia College Faculty Development Fund was instrumental in helping me obtain the photos found in this volume. I am also grateful to the George W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum, the George H. W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum, and Reuters Pictures for their permission to use these photos. I am also indebted to Erin Greb Cartography for creating the maps found in this volume. I came to better understand George W. Bush by traveling to Texas, both to utilize the Bush Library and to interview many of those close to him and his administration. Those several months of trips would not have been possible without the consistent hospitality of the Kibbe and Usray families, thanks to whom I went to my first, and probably last, professional rodeo. Several people read portions of this manuscript and gave me their unvarnished view of my shortcomings. I particularly want to thank the 2 anonymous readers for the University Press of Kansas. Their forthright and thoughtful comments helped to shape the manuscript into a better book. I also wish to thank Sherry and Ken Kubiak, both of whom commented on the early chapters of this work. While I have always thought it a bit redundant for an author to announce that all judgments and mistakes in this book are mine and mine alone, let it be said anyway. Ultimate thanks must go to my family, who after 4 decades understand the commitment of time and attention that is necessary to write a book. I cannot thank Patty, TJ, Kate, Chris, Jenny, and Mary Rose enough, and it is to Oliver that this book is dedicated. Chittenango, New York, 2021. 1. Georgie. George Herbert Walker Bush, the second of 2 sons, future President of the United States, and future father of a President of the United States, was born in Milton, Massachusetts on June 12, 1924. He attended the Tony Greenwich County Day School and boarded at the Phillips Academy, an all-boys prep school 20 miles north of Boston that all Ivy League hopefuls referred to by its location, Andover. The president of his graduating class, and assured of a place in his father's investment banking business, Bush took another path. Profoundly affected, as were many young men of his generation, by the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, he lost no time in finding his way into the ensuing conflict. Deferring his acceptance to Yale University, Bush enlisted in the Navy on June 12, 1942, his 18th birthday. He trained to become a fighter pilot. When he earned his wings, he was the youngest pilot in the Navy. On September 2, 1944, after flying 49 successful missions, Bush and his 2-man crew came under enemy fire near Chichijima, an island some 150 miles north of Iwo Jima. His crew perished, but Bush parachuted into the shark-infested Pacific Ocean. There he drifted for half an hour until the crew of the USS Finback, a submarine patrolling the waters, rescued him. Although he had fulfilled his term of service, Bush never considered leaving the Navy until the war was over. Immediately following his ordeal, he returned to his squadron and served for 3 more months of combat missions. He then took a leave of absence, returned home on June 6, 1945, to marry his sweetheart, Barbara Pierce, and made plans to return to the Pacific. However, the events of early August 1945 made his reenlistment moot. At war's end, he had flown 58 missions, accrued 1,228 hours of flying time, and earned the Distinguished Flying Cross. Bush joined the largest group of returning veterans in our nation's history, close to 15.7 million strong, that became known as the GI Bulge. All were looking to re-enter society and make a better life for themselves than they, children of depression and war, had previously known. Many wanted to enter the workforce forthwith. A surprising number, close to 7.8 million by 1947, wanted to go to college. The Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, better known as the GI Bill, allowed them to do so. While he was not in need of government funds to further his education, Bush lost little time in joining his mates in the classroom, finally accepting Yale's offer to matriculate in the fall of 1945. There he played baseball, made Phi Beta Kappa, and pledged the super-secret Skull and Bones Society. He and Barbara also began a family. On July 6, 1946, the first year of the post-war baby boom, their first son was born. George Walker Bush was named for his father and his great-grandfather. Despite the predilection of the press and later life to call him Junior, he wasn't one. When writing a biography of his father in 2014, he asked his mother why he hadn't been named George H. W. Bush, Jr. She quipped, "Son, most forms don't have room for 5 names." The Bush family lived in New Haven for another 2 years. Bush graduated from Yale with a degree in economics in June 1948. Rejecting offers of certain comfort and security in various parts of the family business in the Northeast, Bush chose instead to cast his lot with thousands of other adventurous and ambitious young men and women who flocked to Texas to try their hand in the booming oil industry. In the summer of 1948, the Bushes moved to Odessa, Texas, a blue-collar town of about 30,000 people that stank of oil and gas fumes, but that promised a quick payoff. 62,249,000 barrels of oil were extracted from Odessa in 1948 alone. Bush began his work for Dresser Industries as a clerk. His living conditions were Spartan, to say the least. The Bushes rented a small duplex and shared a bathroom with a mother and daughter who worked as prostitutes. The Bushes were not in Odessa long. For a year, starting in April 1949, Bush worked for Dresser at 4 different cities in California. But in April 1950, he and his family, now larger with the addition of daughter Pauline Robinson, Robin, born in December 1949, returned to Texas. Midland was located some 23 miles northwest of Odessa, and midway, thus the name, between El Paso and Fort Worth. There, Bush formed the Bush-Overby Oil Development Company, which morphed into Zapata Petroleum in 1952. Bush was now part of the golden age of oil exploration in Midland. By 1950, 215 oil companies had offices in the town, whose population would skyrocket from 21,713 in 1950 to 62,625 in 1960. It existed for oil, serving as the hub of the oil boom centered in Texas's Permian Basin, which chugged out close to 20% of all oil used by Americans in the 1950s. Less of a blue-collar town than Odessa, Midland was home to the managers, geologists, and oil company executives. Thus the saying, "Raise hell in Odessa, raise a family in Midland." The terrain surrounding the city was flat and unforgiving, often seared by drought. The nearest town, excepting Odessa, was a 2-hour drive away, and the work offered no real security. Oil wells either came in or failed, and failure was a harsh master. But Bush had a safety net that most wildcatters did not, a family of means who came to his aid often. Thus, Bush never really shed his eastern roots. He was a true hybrid, in Texas-speak, a transplant, born of northeastern privilege and a Texas wildcatter by choice. This would harden into a duality of personality that biographer Herbert S. Parmet labeled that of a Lone Star Yankee. Little George, as he was known to his family, or as his father referred to him in his correspondence with friends, Georgie, was no transplant. He was a Texan through and through. He was 4 years old when the family moved to Midland, and the experience in West Texas would be the first great sculptor of the boy. For the younger Bush, his early life in Midland was, in his later words, comfortable, carefree, and idyllic. While the town is Sahara-like in its climate and oil-obsessed in its attitude, Bush nevertheless waxed poetic about its beauty in the first volume of his memoirs. When you step outside in Midland, Texas, your horizons suddenly expand. The sky is huge, the land is flat, with not even the hint of a hill to limit the view. The air is clean and bright. The impression is one of the sky as a huge canopy that seems to stretch forever. Yet Midland's beauty formed only a part of Bush's memory. He also remembered that Midland offered him the security blanket of growing up in a small town. Bush remembered a setting where he could ride his bike downtown to see a movie, where the children walked to school, where the entire town spent Friday nights cheering on the high school football team, and where all the mothers stayed home and were there for their children at the end of the day. To Bush, his home was a small town with small-town values. No one locked their doors. It was a happy childhood. The younger Bush would also come to see his formative experience in Midland as being the great separator between himself and his father. Whenever anyone asked about the differences between him and his father, he would habitually reply with the same line. "I went to Sam Houston Elementary School in Midland, Texas, and he went to Greenwich Country Day School in Connecticut." From an early age, the son was completely without his father's patrician manners. Where the father was often smooth and erudite, the son was just as often rough-hewn and crude. Indeed, Georgie was a born troublemaker, who was described by his father as follows in a letter to a friend. "Georgie has grown to be a near man, talks dirty once in a while, and occasionally swears, aged 4.5. He lives in his cowboy boots." One biographer believes that this was all an act, that the younger Bush became adept at assuming the persona of a good old boy. But there is little evidence of this. Indeed, most observers agreed that young George was more like his often irreverent and blunt mother than he was his reserved father. But father and son did share one passion. Renouncing the Texas fixation with football, the son adopted his father's love of baseball. Georgie was a Little League catcher. His father was, for a time, his team's coach. He collected baseball cards, read the sports columns, and memorized player stats. His favorite player was Willie Mays. They also shared in a traumatic family loss. In spring 1953, Georgie's sister Robin was diagnosed with an advanced case of leukemia. Her parents decided to treat the 3-year-old child at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City, hoping to lessen her agony and save her life. Neither happened. Barbara stayed with the child. Bush commuted to New York on weekends, and 7.5-year-old George, who had not been told about his sister's condition, stayed back in Midland with neighbors and a family nurse, as did his baby brother John Ellis, or Jeb, who had been born some 2 months before Robin received her diagnosis. After 7 excruciating months, 28-year-old Barbara's hair turned white during the ordeal, Robin died at Sloan Kettering on October 11, 1953. A picture of her 2 brothers hung above her hospital bed. Georgie learned of his sister's passing almost by accident, when he ran out of his elementary school to meet his parents' car, thinking he saw his sister in the back seat, only to be told she had died. His mother justified keeping her son in the dark by telling herself that "we thought he was too young to know." Nevertheless, he was devastated both by the news and by his parents' secrecy, repeating over and over to them, "Why didn't you tell me?" As he would later remember, those minutes remain the starkest memory of my childhood. The family mourned in stoic silence. The elder Bush threw himself into his work. But Barbara grieved through her eldest son. Suffering from periodic bouts of depression, she overwhelmed Georgie with the time and attention she felt she had been denying him, to the point that, as he remembered later, she kind of smothered me, then realized it was the wrong thing to do. He would later recall that, after 7 months of staying strong, she cratered. One day, Barbara found her son and told him she needed to go to the doctor. On the way, she told him that she had just had a miscarriage. To add to the shock, she showed her son the fetus, which she had saved in a jar to take to the hospital. But despite such terrible grief, the Bush family did indeed grow. Neil was born in 1955, Marvin in 1956, and finally Dorothy, Doro, in 1959. As the Bush family boomed, so too did Texas oil, and the future of the oil business was in offshore drilling. In 1958, Zapata Oil split in half. The following year, Bush took his half to Houston. Bush enrolled his eldest son in Houston's Kincaid School, a private co-ed school. In 1998, as his son prepared his own run for the presidency, the senior Bush tried to make stories about his son's adolescent life disappear by writing to Time magazine columnist Hugh Sidey that all the stories about his Georgie's misspent youth were pure
Sample complete. Ready to continue?